My name is Alexander Daniel Cross, and I'm 36 years old. I have steel gray hair that started turning prematurely in my late 20s, which I keep styled in a contemporary side part that works well in both construction sites and boardrooms. My eyes are a striking pale blue, almost ice-colored, and they tend to intensify when I'm focused or angry. My face is lean with sharp features, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and a mouth that rarely reveals what I'm thinking. There's a thin white scar running along my left temple from a construction accident during my internship years, barely visible unless you know to look for it. For 11 years, I was the principal architect at Morrison & Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious architectural firms. We designed luxury residential towers, corporate headquarters, and cultural institutions that define New York's skyline. My buildings weren't just structures. They were statements about how people should live, work, and interact with their urban environment. Architectural Digest called my residential designs poetry in concrete and steel, and the American Institute of Architects had recognized 3 of my projects with national awards. Then Richard Morrison decided my vision was too uncompromising for modern clients. The meeting happened on a gray Tuesday morning in November. Richard called me into his corner office with its panoramic views of Central Park, the same office where his father had founded the firm 43 years earlier. He was seated behind the mahogany desk that had been in the family for generations, wearing one of his perfectly tailored Italian suits. His nephew Jeffrey sat beside him, fresh from Harvard Business School with his MBA and grand ideas about modernizing the family business. "Alex," Richard began, using the shortened name I'd never invited him to use, "we need to discuss the direction of your projects." I'd sensed this conversation coming for months. Ever since Jeffrey joined the firm as Director of Strategic Development, there had been increasing pressure to modify my designs. My commitment to sustainable materials, to creating spaces that honor both human scale and environmental responsibility, to refusing compromises that would cheapen the final product. Suddenly, all of it felt inflexible to their profit-focused minds. "The real estate market is evolving rapidly," Richard continued, sliding a folder across the desk. "Clients want faster timelines, lower costs, more standardized approaches. Your designs, while architecturally distinguished, require too much time and specialized craftsmanship." I opened the folder to find my termination package. 11 years of creating buildings that would outlast us all. 11 years of fighting for every detail that made the difference between mere construction and true architecture. 11 years of my relationships with the city's finest contractors, craftsmen, and engineers. All of it reduced to a severance agreement and a non-disclosure clause. "We're bringing in Cameron Walsh from Los Angeles," Jeffrey added with the confidence of someone who'd never actually built anything. "He specializes in efficient luxury, high-end aesthetics with streamlined construction processes, the kind of architecture that maximizes return on investment." The irony was crushing. Cameron Walsh was known for exactly the kind of work I'd spent my career trying to elevate beyond. Generic luxury boxes that looked impressive in renderings but had no soul. No connection to their surroundings, no consideration for how people actually lived within them. "I appreciate your contributions to the firm's legacy," Richard said, though his tone suggested he was already mentally redesigning my office space. "This transition represents an evolution, not a judgment on your abilities." I maintained the composure that had carried me through countless contentious planning board meetings. 11 years of designing buildings that enhanced their neighborhoods rather than dominating them. 11 years of developing sustainable construction techniques that other firms eventually adopted. None of it mattered to Richard's new bottom-line calculations. What Richard didn't know was that I'd been quietly cultivating relationships outside Morrison & Associates for years. Not because I'd planned to leave, but because great architecture requires a network of collaborators, engineers, contractors, material suppliers, and visionary clients who understood that buildings should serve more than just economic functions. As I packed my drafting materials that afternoon, my German precision instruments, the scale rulers my mentor had given me, the portfolio of sketches that represented years of creative problem solving. I reflected on all the confidential information I'd been privy to during my time at the firm. The cost overruns they'd hidden from clients, the corner cutting they'd approved to meet deadlines, the times they'd taken credit for innovations I'd developed. I'd designed the Morrison family's own penthouse renovation 3 years earlier, creating a living space that balanced privacy with openness, tradition with modernity. During those months of meetings in their home, Richard had praised my ability to understand not just what clients requested, but what they actually needed. "You don't just design buildings, Alex," he'd said while reviewing the plans. "You design better lives for the people who inhabit them." Now that same man was dismissing me as inflexible. 3 weeks after my termination, I received a call from Elena Vasquez, founder of Meridian Development Group, one of the most innovative real estate firms in the city. I'd consulted on material selections for one of their projects 2 years earlier, creating a rooftop garden system that had become a model for other developers. "Alexander," her voice was direct and urgent, "I need to see you immediately. Are you available this afternoon?" We met at her office in the Flatiron District, a converted industrial space that she transformed into a showcase for sustainable urban design. Elena poured 2 cups of fair trade coffee and got straight to the point. "I've been hearing troubling things about your departure from Morrison and Associates," she said. "Richard has been telling people in the industry that your designs had become too theoretical, that you'd lost touch with practical construction realities." My stomach clenched. This wasn't just about career transition. Richard was actively undermining my professional reputation in a field where credibility determined everything. He's suggesting to potential clients and planning officials that Morrison's recent project delays were caused by your perfectionist tendencies, Elena continued carefully. That bringing in Cameron Walsh represents a return to practical architecture. The lies were strategically targeted. In architecture, being labeled as impractical or disconnected from construction realities was professional death. If word spread that I couldn't balance design vision with buildable solutions, no serious developer would trust me with significant projects. "Why are you warning me about this?" I asked. Elena studied me over her coffee cup. "Because I've worked with your buildings. The residential tower you designed on the Upper West Side isn't just beautiful, it's the most energy-efficient luxury building in the city. You created something that proves sustainability and elegance aren't mutually exclusive." She paused, setting down her cup with deliberation. "Also because I have a proposition that might interest you." That afternoon, Elena outlined her offer. Meridian Development was planning their most ambitious project yet, a mixed-use development in Brooklyn that would redefine urban living for the next generation. She wanted an architect who understood that great buildings should enhance communities, not just house people. "I'm offering you the position of design director and equity partner," Elena said. "Complete creative control, sustainable construction budget, and the opportunity to prove that responsible architecture can be more profitable than the generic luxury market." The opportunity was exactly what I dreamed of during my years at Morrison and Associates. A chance to design buildings that would demonstrate how architecture could address urban challenges while creating beautiful, functional spaces. "There's one consideration you should know about," Elena added. "The site is directly across from Morrison's newest project, that glass tower they're rushing to complete by next summer." The location wasn't coincidental. Elena had been waiting for the right architect to make that site work, and she wanted someone who could show the city what thoughtful development looked like in contrast to generic luxury construction. I accepted her offer that same day. The next 8 months were the most challenging and rewarding of my career. We completely reimagined what urban residential development could be, integrating affordable housing with luxury condominiums, creating public spaces that serve the broader community, incorporating renewable energy systems that would make the building carbon neutral within 5 years. I called the project Confluence because great architecture happens when different needs, Different people and different ideas flow together naturally. While we were developing plans and navigating the complex approval process, I learned what Richard was doing across the street. Cameron Walsh had indeed taken over my projects, implementing exactly the kind of cookie-cutter luxury approach I'd expected. Glass facades with minimal insulation, generic floor plans that maximize square footage without considering livability, amenity spaces designed for Instagram rather than actual community building. The architecture press was initially positive, praising Morrison and Associates' streamlined new efficiency. But experienced developers were less impressed. One industry publication noted that the firm had traded architectural leadership for market following. Meanwhile, word about Confluence was generating excitement among urban planners and sustainability advocates. The project had attracted attention from the mayor's office as a model for responsible development. Several city council members were citing it as an example of how private development could serve broader public interests. 4 weeks before breaking ground, Richard called me. "Alex," his voice carried forced collegiality, "I've been following your Brooklyn project with interest. Perhaps we could discuss it over lunch." We met at a restaurant in Midtown, neutral territory where Richard felt comfortable making whatever pitch he prepared. He looked different, less confident, more calculating. The paternal authority he displayed during our final meeting had been replaced by something approaching anxiety. "I understand you're building quite an impressive project," he began carefully. "It's been an exciting challenge," I replied neutrally. "Listen," he continued, "there may have been some miscommunication about your departure from the firm. Some people have gotten the wrong impression about why we restructured." I remained silent, waiting to hear what he'd actually come to say. "I'd like to propose a collaboration. Morrison and Associates could handle the commercial aspects of Confluence while you maintain creative control. It would be a win-win partnership." The desperation was thinly veiled. Richard had realized that having his former star architect building across the street might create uncomfortable comparisons for potential clients. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, "but Meridian has everything we need to complete the project successfully." Richard's diplomatic mask slipped slightly. "Alex, you have to understand the position this puts the firm in. We've been part of Manhattan's architectural community for over 4 decades. This kind of direct competition feels unnecessarily confrontational." "It's not confrontational," I replied calmly. "It's professional. I'm designing a building that serves its community. Where I choose to do that work is a business decision." The lunch ended awkwardly, with Richard making vague references to industry courtesy and professional obligations. I left feeling more committed than ever to proving that architecture could serve broader purposes than just maximizing rental income. 2 days later, I received a letter from Morrison's legal team. They were claiming that several design elements in Confluence violated intellectual property developed during my employment with their firm. The letter was professionally crafted but legally questionable, an intimidation tactic designed to delay our construction timeline. I forwarded it to Atlanta's attorneys, who responded with surgical precision. They demonstrated that my sustainable design approaches had been developed before joining Morrison and Associates, that architectural principles couldn't be copyrighted, and that any attempt to restrict my professional practice would constitute illegal restraint of trade. They also included documentation showing that Morrison had actually borrowed several of my innovations for their own recent projects. Most significantly, they noted that any false intellectual property claims would result in a defamation lawsuit that would expose Morrison's declining client relationships to public examination. Richard's lawyers never responded to that letter. Confluence broke ground on a beautiful May morning. The ceremony attracted city officials, sustainability advocates, and architecture critics who recognized the project as something genuinely innovative. We weren't just building apartments, we were creating a model for how urban development could strengthen communities rather than displacing them. But the most satisfying moment came when I noticed James Chun, Morrison's former structural engineer, in the crowd. He'd left Richard's firm 3 months earlier, frustrated by the corner cutting that Cameron Walsh had implemented to meet aggressive timelines, After the ceremony, he approached me. "Alexander," he said quietly, "this is what we should have been building all along. This is why I became an engineer." Construction proceeded faster than anyone had expected. My relationships with skilled craftsmen and sustainable material suppliers, developed over years of fighting for quality at Morrison and Associates, allowed us to maintain both timeline and standards. The construction team respected the project because they could see we weren't cutting corners or making compromises that would create problems later. 6 months into construction, Architecture Week published a cover story about the new urban vision, featuring Confluence as the centerpiece of a movement toward responsible development. The article contrasted our approach with the luxury-first developments that had dominated Manhattan construction, presenting it as a story about architecture serving community needs rather than just investor returns. In the same issue, Morrison and Associates received a brief mention in the Industry Changes section, with lukewarm praise for their market-responsive efficiency. 2 days after that magazine appeared, Richard showed up at the Confluence construction site. I watched from the project trailer as he walked the perimeter, examining our work, taking notes on his phone. After an hour, he approached the trailer and asked to speak with me privately. "May I come in?" he asked, suddenly looking older than his 61 years. I invited him into the trailer that served as my temporary office. Richard sat across from my desk, surrounded by the plans and models that represented everything I'd been trying to achieve for years. "I made a mistake," he said without preamble. "What you're building here, this integration of sustainability, community benefit, and architectural excellence, this is what Morrison and Associates should be leading." I remained quiet, letting him continue. "Cameron is competent at producing marketable buildings, but he's not a visionary. He creates spaces that people buy, but they don't love them, don't feel proud to live in them. You create places that become part of people's identities." Richard paused, staring at the architectural models on my desk. "I've spent 40 years building this firm's reputation, and I threw it away because I was afraid of taking risks in a changing market." "What are you asking, Richard?" He met my eyes for the first time since entering the trailer. "I want you to come back. As senior partner and creative director. Full design authority, equity stake in the firm, whatever terms you need." The irony was perfect. 8 months ago, he dismissed my approach as too uncompromising for modern markets. Now he was offering me partnership because that same approach was attracting exactly the clients Morrison and Associates was losing. "I'm honored by the offer," I said carefully, "but Confluence is just beginning. I have commitments here that extend beyond this single project." "Name your terms," Richard pressed. "I'll match whatever Elena is offering, plus you could oversee both firms. Think of the projects we could tackle together." I stood up, looking out the trailer window at the construction site where my vision was becoming reality. "Some opportunities don't come twice, Richard. You taught me that when you let me go." As he prepared to leave, Richard made one final attempt. "You're making a mistake, Alex. Morrison and Associates has 4 decades of reputation and client relationships. Starting over is always harder than rebuilding." I walked him to the trailer door. "I'm not starting over. I'm finally building what I always envisioned." That was our last private conversation. Confluence opened 18 months later to extraordinary acclaim. The building achieved LEED Platinum certification, the first residential development in Brooklyn to reach that standard. More importantly, it proved that sustainable architecture could be more profitable than conventional luxury development. Our units sold faster and commanded higher prices than comparable buildings in the neighborhood. The architectural community took notice. I was invited to lecture at Columbia's architecture school, to consult on municipal sustainability initiatives, to design similar projects in other cities. Most significantly, the success of Confluence had demonstrated that architects could be profitable, while serving broader social and environmental responsibilities. Morrison and Associates continued to struggle with their new direction. They lost several long-term clients who were dissatisfied with Cameron Walsh's generic approach. The firm's reputation for architectural leadership, built over 4 decades, was gradually being replaced by a perception of market-following mediocrity. 2 years after Confluence opened, Richard was forced to merge Morrison and Associates with a larger commercial firm. The family name remained on the letterhead, but the independent vision that had defined the company was gone. The vindication I felt wasn't bitter. It was the quiet satisfaction of proving that architecture could serve both aesthetic and ethical purposes simultaneously. Great buildings weren't about choosing between beauty and responsibility. They were about finding elegant solutions that achieved both. 3 years after leaving Morrison and Associates, I was invited to receive the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal, the profession's highest honor. The citation specifically mentioned my innovative integration of sustainable design with urban community development, and my demonstration that architectural excellence and social responsibility are mutually reinforcing. The ceremony was held at the Javits Center with hundreds of architects, planners, and developers in attendance. Richard was there, seated near the back, alone. During the reception after my acceptance speech, he approached. "Congratulations," he said simply. His voice carried genuine respect now. That was a remarkable speech. "Thank you for coming." He studied my face for a moment. I've been thinking about that day I let you go. I was so worried about immediate market pressures that I forgot what made our work valuable in the first place." I nodded but remained quiet. "I see now that you weren't being uncompromising with clients," he continued. "You were being uncompromising with your principles, and that's what clients actually respected about our firm." "Fear makes us lose sight of what really matters sometimes," I replied. Richard smiled sadly. "Indeed it does. I hope you know that watching your success has been both humbling and inspiring." As he walked away, I felt something unexpected, not triumph, but closure. The anger that had motivated me during those first difficult months had transformed into something more valuable, the deep satisfaction of work that mattered. Recognition earned through merit, and architectural vision validated by communities that benefited from thoughtful design. Today, I lead a firm that has designed sustainable developments in 6 cities. We've proven that architecture can be profitable while serving environmental and social goals, that buildings can strengthen communities rather than isolating their residents, that good design is ultimately more economical than cheap construction. Sometimes during the quiet early morning hours when I review plans for our next project, I think about my years at Morrison and Associates, not with bitterness anymore, but with gratitude for the lessons learned, about the importance of maintaining vision under pressure, about the difference between short-term profits and long-term value, about the responsibility architects bear for the spaces where people live their lives. In my office, I keep a framed photograph of Confluence at sunset, its green rooftop garden visible against the Manhattan skyline. Below, it is a quote from Louis Kahn: "A building is a struggle against the elements, and it is the architect's job to make the building win." That photograph represents everything I tried to achieve at Morrison and Associates, but was never fully empowered to pursue. Richard taught me something valuable, though not what he intended. He showed me that architectural integrity isn't negotiable, that excellence serves communities better than efficiency, and that sometimes the best response to being undervalued is simply creating work so good that its worth becomes undeniable. The last project I designed for Morrison and Associates was a luxury residential tower, beautiful, efficient, but ultimately forgettable. The first project I designed for Meridian was Confluence, a building that proves architecture can change how people live, work, and relate to their urban environment. Both buildings addressed the need for housing in an expensive city, but only one was designed in an environment that valued the long-term impact as much as the immediate profit. In the end, Richard was right about one thing: the real estate market was evolving. He just misunderstood what direction it was heading. While he chased standardized efficiency, I pursued innovative sustainability. While he courted quick returns, I built lasting value. While he focused on minimizing costs, I invested in maximizing benefits, environmental, social, and economic. The market, as always, rewarded the approach that offered genuine value to real people in real communities. Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving someone wrong about your abilities. It's proving so thoroughly right about your vision that their mistake becomes a case study in missed opportunities. And in the quiet satisfaction of a building that serves its community well, in the grateful recognition of residents whose lives are genuinely improved by thoughtful design, I found something better than revenge. I found my calling and the courage to build it.